Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to have a discussion today about some of the big news coming to Wuthering Waves version 2.8. And depending on the type of player that you are and the type of units that you like, this news is either going to be really good or it's going to be really bad. And we're here to talk about why that might be the case. Because we got a new 4-star unit, ladies and gentlemen. We got Buling, and she has officially been announced. So let's just take a bit of a deep dive. Let's talk about her. Let's talk about her characterization. And of course, let's also talk about just where she's from as well, because she's a pretty story-important character if you haven't been keeping up with the past couple of versions. Post-Lament Anthropocene, stars intertwined, blah, blah, blah. Let's read it out. And you know what? Let's just take it. Let's just read this part first because it gets covered up by the chat. Exorcism, talisman divination, fortune telling, you name it, I bling it. This character is so fucking lame. It's unbelievable. I'm just gonna be real with you. There's something about me just hates this character's personality. It might just be me. Some people might like her. But she's just, I wish she would just take things like slightly more seriously occasionally. Right now, I feel like she's like an annoying version of, she reminds me of if like Silverwolf was like in the Wuthering Waves universe, but like not as sassy, but still like kind of like really annoying, and like gets in your way all the time. But maybe that's just me. Some people might like her. I'm not here to yuck your yum if that's the case. That's just how I personally feel. Let's move on. Buling is a Black Shores consultant, known as the Spirit Chaser Taoist, who wanders far and wide investigating and sharing the strange and mysterious. She is a master of fortune telling, feng shui, and other arts of divination. I probably pronounced that wrong. And other arts of divination. To cover the expenses in her travels, she sells talismans and offers her divination services, which she thinks of as a sort of guidance for those in need. So if I could think about this character and who she reminds me of, she seems like a bit of a combination of like, who, did divination and stuff like that, as well as Yohu, who actually does the whole thing about like selling priceless artifacts or like collecting them and stuff like that. So not, I would say, the most like original sounding character, at least from like a personality perspective, because she does seem like a blend of whatever's going on over here and, of course, right, whatever used to go on over here. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the specifics. So you can see over here, she looks like she's a native to Huanglong. Otherwise, I'm not exactly sure what this text is like supposed to be. And she has some very, 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 I mean, you could probably tell from the accent that she has in the game. It's not really too much of a surprise at all that she's, from the, I wouldn't necessarily say Jinzhou, but clearly the China ancillary that's in, Wuthering Waves. And, naturally, right, she's going to be a 4-star unit. Let's first talk a little bit about the natural implications of where she's from. Buling is from the Black Shores. And we all know from Wuthering Waves version 2.6 and 2.7 that she played a pretty pivotal role in guiding the rover and guiding, units like Augusta, all of that, on the journeys to solving the issues in Septimont. However, we didn't really get to see up front a lot of her combat capabilities, or really anything aside from, well, this. So let's just take a quick look at this teaser over here. Buling's resonance ability enables her to pick up sounds imperceptible to others and bestows on her exceptional sensitivity to reverberation frequencies. She takes off her headphones, listening while holding her breath, then she starts murmuring and tapping her thumb against her fingers. And in an answer, thunder crashes and lightning flashes, and all evils are repelled. So let's take a look at this. She had that little talisman that she was using to, like, guide us to places. That seems like it's going to be a pivotal part of her kit. And then, naturally, that's pretty much the only thing that we end up seeing in here because she's a 4-star unit. At least they made one for her. So, key word to talk about over here is thunder crashes and lightning flashes. So this is almost confirmation to me that this character is going to be Electro. Maybe this is just like very, very, very rough characterization, a very loose usage of language over here. But if I see something like this in the character description, I will assume Electro. However, Nothing about her design tells me Electro. So this is really, I think Kuro Games pulling another fast one on us, because I think most people would assume that she's actually a Spectro or Glacio unit. And so we'll make sure to talk about that later on. So, yeah, she clearly uses that talisman and stuff in combat. She's a Black Shores consultant. I imagine that she'll actually have more major roles to play in version 2.8 and naturally onward, simply due to the fact that, well, this is the version that she's releasing, and she's already had that story, exposure as an expert. So she's probably going to join us along in the journey wherever we end up meeting Chisa, who is, of course, the other character arriving. And I've already made, the sort of, lore implications that Chisa looks like she's trapped in some other sort of world. That's why her statement is, I will sever this deadlock. There's kind of a stalemate going on between her and wherever she's maybe, stuck in. And I would imagine that, Buling, right, this person who's sort of this expert, has all this exceptional sensitivity. She might be the one that, finds her hidden away in, this, it looks like a Sonaro sphere to me. That's why there's, that black hole and shit in the background, right? So that's what I think is going to be going on. Maybe her feng shui is going to help us find out, what is actually happening in that area, unravel the secrets behind it, and then, naturally maybe collapse it from within. She seems like a pretty knowledgeable character, and she seems like she does know more about Rover when it comes to a lot of things. So yeah, I think she's going to have a lot of story significance, but of course, not really take up the spotlight as a 4-star. Now, let's talk more about the specifics of her being a 4-star, because I think that this is where stuff gets really, really, really concerning. It's no lie at all to say that Wuthering Waves does not have a lot of 4-star units. If you look at the current roster, actually, right now, of the 4-star units, let me just show you something. The ones in purple are the 4-star units. We've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have 11 4-stars in Wuthering Waves, and you can clearly see there are way more 5-star units than there are 4-star units. And the reason for that, I think, is pretty simple. Kuro Games has probably received a lot of feedback that the 4-star units that they're pushing out have been absolute dog water, complete dog shit, absolute trash. Because the only ones that they've added to the game are Yohu, who functionally does almost nothing in any real team and only works in an offshoot, off-meta, almost feels like bug abuse team in Whimpering Wastes with one specific lineup. Otherwise, she's just objectively worse than every other unit in every other way in the healer category. Then you have Lumi, who has a really, really, really clunky kit, clunky playstyle, and has one of the worst outro skill buffs in the game, based off the fact that hers only lasts 10 seconds, while everybody else's outro skill buff lasts for 14. So she just has way more limited use cases aside from that, but is honestly not that bad of a character outside from her outro skill. But with her outro skill, which is actually quite, I'll actually just show you. It's actually quite strong. Resonant skill damage amplified by 38%. If only it lasts her for 14 seconds, she might actually be a viable unit. But right now, she's not. And the reality of the situation is that these two units don't find any use at all, unlike some of the key 4-star units that we have in the game, like the Mortefi, Sanhua, etc., etc. And the end result is that, well, they haven't been great additions to the game. All they've done is clog up the 4-star pool, make it harder to actually pull the, well, let me just show you an example of the good 4-stars. She just makes it harder, or these two units just make it harder to pull the actual good 4-stars in the game that have fully powered outro skills, so on and so forth. My honest take is that unless Buling is actually strong, actually a powerful character that you want to slot in on your teams, she might just have the same exact fate as these two. Unused, unwanted, and you dread seeing them on any rate-up banner, because that means that you won't be able to get, well, a bunch of corals instead. This is going to be a 10 pull for science. I hope I don't get a dupe, right? Most of the time when you just do a 10 pull, perfect, right? Most of the time when you do a 10 pull and you get a dupe of a 4-star, it'll be converted into extra corals alongside the baseline coral reward hidden by chat. You can see the 3 over there. You get 5 additional ones for getting an S6 character. And then you get a dupe of them, right, as a 4-star. If there's ever a character like Lumi over here, right, that shows up, new character, and they're also dog shit, and you're never going to use them in any team because they're so actually bad, then, well, you're just going to end up getting less corals too. There are a lot of drawbacks to having unused garbage, not viable 4-stars in the game, and I'm just praying it doesn't happen to Buling. Now, let's talk about some of the potential roles that I feel like she could play, and some of the clearly missing spaces on the roster that a new 4-star unit could easily fill. So this is merely just like speculation and theory crafting on what she can do, and there are clearly a lot of examples of where we need some new units. First things first, I want to talk about just general outro skill buffs. I've already listed out 2 examples of units that have some pretty powerful buffs over here. They also come with at S6, so there's a lot of incentive to get copies of them, and it feels great getting dupes of them. A general attack buff to the entire team when they use an essential part of their kit. It would be nice if we had units like this for Resonance skill, as well as Resonance Liberation with full duration outro skills. If you take a look at the only other general buffers in the game that, you know, aren't 5-star limited units, the roster doesn't look that great. These are the ways that you can buff Resonance Liberation and Resonance skill damage. You can use a Tao Chi, who is not an offensive character, very defense-oriented one, or a John Shin, who is a standard 5-star, who literally is actually one of the worst ones in the game because her rotation time takes too long. I would love to see characters that just have the same outro skills as this, but on kits that are just better. I'm not even joking, because Tao Chi just feels worse than the Mortifi or a Sanhua. And the reason is simple. Her sequence notes kind of like don't do anything for her team at all. This is her S6. It boosts her non-existent basic and heavy attack damage by 40%, which is just trash compared to, naturally, the stuff that you're seeing over here. You also have John Shin over here, who, once again, you can't really get copies of her on demand because you gotta lose 50/50s, and her rotation time is so horrifically slow, and she doesn't even have buffs in her kit, unlike 4-star units, who end up buffing and performing her role way better than her, unless you really like John Shin's shield. And the ask is simple. Create a Resonance skill version of Sanhua or Mortifi, or create a Resonance Liberation version of Sanhua or Mortifi. Kuro tried to do this with Lumi, and they got close. Lumi's S6 actually provides that 20% attack buff, but once again, because her outro skill is so short, she's still not viable. So it was really just a swing and a miss over here. Maybe Kuro could do something crazy and just add a fucking 4 to here, and then maybe that would be enough. Next, we clearly talked about how there's no Resonance Liberation 4-star buffer. I would love if Buling at S6 simply had something like this. Something like this where she buffs the entire team, she then buffs one of those damage types on her outro skill, and then fills in a role on the roster that we just have not had in the runtime of the game. There's also another use case that I would really like to see for Buling. Because she's such a story pivotal character, and because she is a part of the Black Shores, I don't think it would be that bad at all if she also became one of the more general 4-stars in the game, and had capabilities that rivaled Rover's, but are kind of just worse in every way. And what I mean by that is being a debuff applier. Not the best one. She would still not feel the greatest, but she could apply debuffs for maybe all of the attributes in the game. Think about things like your Spectral Frazzles, right? Think about things like your Arrow Erosions. Something like that, where she can, like, work alongside Rover to be able to, you know, do all of these mechanics, have all of these enabilizations, but she's not going to be as strong, right, as a Chakota. She's not going to be as strong as a Phoebe. In fact, I would be honestly okay if she feels a decent amount worse, but simply make it possible for these teams, right, that require these sort of mechanics to function a lot more easily if they don't have Rover there. And I think that would also be a funny thing as well, right? Oh, you don't have Rover, who's one of the best buffers for these negative status teams. Okay, you'll have Buling instead. She's kind of like his apprentice, right? She's also in the Black Shores. She'll do the job, but not as well as Rover in these situations, right? I feel like that could be like a fun little vibe for the units for the Black Shores, that sort of relationship to have. And it would also give her, right, more general use cases, make her almost feel like a shorekeeper for debuffs. But then also, not really shorekeeper because she's not going to be best in class. Naturally, I think that this is a kind of like a potential. I could see why Kuro would or wouldn't want to do that, because she's never going to actually be used if you already have the existing enablers. Like, you're never going to use Buling on your Cartithia team if you already have Chakota. You're never going to use Buling on your Zodi team if you already have Phoebe. But for those, right, that maybe don't have the 5-star units, don't have the pulls available, you could give them a version of the team that will still function, even when the next version of Rover, right, moves on to different things. Because, let's be real here, right? If you're using Arrow Rover on your Arrow Erosion team, then what are you really going to do if you need the Spectral version, right, for your Spectral Frazzle team? Or you need the Havoc version as like a DPS on your Havoc teams. It's just, there's clearly a situation where the use cases of this guy, because he's such an enabler of all these different archetypes, it's getting spread thin. And what better way to relieve that, workload other than to shovel it off to one of your actual literal employees? Because, yeah, Rover is literally her boss. That's why I think she calls him that, or she calls them that during the story. That would be like, hey, here are my responsibilities. I've been keeping these teams viable for the past 6 months. Now it's your job, Buling. Yeah, no, I think that would be a fun little mechanic. That's, again, my thoughts. I hope that she fills at least one of those roles. Because believe me if I say this, if she isn't a replacement for a Tao Chi and a John Shin, and she doesn't do that general buffing with the attack buff at S6, or she doesn't replace Chakona, or not really replace, but she isn't like a low-grade replacement for Chakona or Phoebe in these, these application teams, she is going to be another character that just joins this lineup of abandoned, useless, unwanted 4-star units that people feel took away from the game rather than adding to the game. And so I just pray, Kuro Games, that this 1-year break that it's taken, the 1-year break that it's taken to release another 4-star after releasing 2 consecutive dog shit ones, I hope that was enough for, the heads in the kit design room, all of that, to make something that people are actually looking forward to pulling. Because that was not the case for these two. They've taken away from the game and actually made the experience worse for a lot of people. Let's hope Buling makes the game better, and we've provided all the different ways that she can do that. Let me know what you all thought about this breakdown, what you all thought about, the sort of concerns that I have when it comes to 4-stars, because one thing is clear. Wuthering Waves doesn't have a lot. Wuthering Waves has added some, and they haven't been great additions to the game. Let me know what you all thought. Peace.